closely with research. This is a...
Welcome back to the Moot Workshop. We're going to dig right in here and start restoring the chassis to the 1930 Brunswick Model 15 floor radio. I started off trying to get the rust with some penetrating oil and some steel wool, but it's not really doing a great job. So I'm going to switch to a de-rusting gel, which was much more effective. Do as I say, not as I do here. I really should be wearing some rubber gloves because this stuff can be nasty to your skin. These covers on top, because they're on top, got a lot of the water drips, and so they have a hell of a lot of rust on them. The bottom plate is pretty bad too. Water is catching underneath it and between it and the wood, and you can see where it's collected in a puddle right in the inside of it. It's very pitted, very rough. We're going to have to do a lot of work on this to smooth it out. After 15 or 20 minutes, I've got to wash the chemicals off the metal, and you want to make sure you dry them very carefully afterwards too, or you're just going to get rust back again. And then I'm going to run them over the wire wheel here to get the corrosion off and try to smooth the surface a little bit more. You get actually an almost shiny finish if the metal isn't too badly pitted. So I could actually stop here and have a reasonably acceptable result. So that I can properly clean up and sand this thing, I need to get the track for the tuning scale off of here. It's riveted on, so I'm grinding the backs of the rivets. Okay, now starting with the covers, we're going to perform the same kind of a ritual on every one of the pieces of metal on this thing. We're going to sand the pits off, at least until we feel like we've done enough, with a very coarse grade of emery paper, then shift to a finer grade, and finer still, until we feel like we have a pretty smooth surface. And then once we've got the surface as smooth as we think it should be, we can switch to polishing it on the polishing wheel. That's not too bad. I will get the big cover. That looks pretty good. Now we're going to switch our attention back to the bottom plate. There's some pretty deep pits here on the bottom of this. I'm not going to focus on the bottom especially strongly because I sand through most of the metal by the time I got all these pits out. It really hurts me to have to do this, but the armored chassis logo needs to come off the back of the thing. I've already off camera done some sanding and had been avoiding this side of it, but the time has come because I need to sand the entire outside surface on this thing. Just like with the other pieces, we start with coarser paper, and I even went back to some really coarse paper to get this really bad pitting off of the side of it. And then we switch to finer paper, and finer paper still. Basically, you make some scratches, and then you make smaller scratches, and then you make smaller scratches until you can't see the scratches anymore. So you can probably guess there's a lot of this. So I could just show you step by step the whole thing and it would take hours and hours. This is a really fast time lapse of me just basically doing the whole outside of the thing one last final time, from heavier to finer still. And then once I get past all of the dry grits of the emery paper, then I switch to wet sanding, and I went through wet sanding grits all the way down to 1500 grit, and then at that point we've got it smooth enough that we can do some polishing. And now we've got it about as shiny as it's going to be. There's some evidence that this may have been plated at one point. See this sort of lighter color here? It's like there's a little bit of nickel plating or something left there. We actually do have one more smaller component we need to polish up, and that's this track for the tuning scale. But it's in really good shape at the top. It's just these vertical supports down here that have gotten rusty. The top of this, I'm just hand polishing this. This is the original finish. It's definitely got some kind of plating on it. It's shining up quite nicely. Now down in the crooks of these things, it's really hard to get to it, to get the rust off of there, so I'm going to make a little sliver of emery paper and scrub some of that out of there. That's the last little bit that needs to be done to this. Now that we have the track all cleaned up, I need to reattach it. I'm going to rivet it, but I need to hold it on temporarily, get it in alignment by putting a couple of screws and nuts on here. And once I've got that in position, I can get out the rivets themselves. So I'm going to use this little rivet setter, which is just barely big enough. I mean, literally just barely big enough to reach the first rivet. I tighten this up and squash the rivet down, and that sets that rivet. Now I can go on to the second one at the other end. Now that I've got those two set, I have to deal with the ones that are too far down for the rivet setter to reach. So what I'm going to have to do for those is I'm going to have to beat on them with tools to flatten it out the hard way. All right, all done. Now that we have a thing to house all the parts, I'm going to start restoring the parts, and we're going to begin with the tuning condenser. This really doesn't need a whole lot done to it. It's in really good shape. It mostly just needs cleaning and shining up, so I'm just going to disassemble parts of it to make some of that cleaning easier and remove and replace some decayed wiring. Now we'll just buff up some of the parts on the wire wheel. You know the drill. See what I did there? And now we can start putting it back together again. Using steel wool to get some of the tarnish off of the brass pieces. And then I'm going to get the remnants of the old wires and solder off of all the solder tabs. I find these locking forceps to be one of the most useful tools in my shop. I need to attach new wires to these connectors, and I'm going to be using some more of that antique looking wire that has the cloth jacket on the outside, but inside it's modern insulation. I'm using that throughout this project. and now a piece of red heat shrink tubing, which looks a lot like the original red insulation that was on there. And there we go, all clean and shiny and ready to reinstall in the chassis. Now we need to clean up the tuning mechanism because this is all very rusty. It's basically the same process I used on all the other metal parts. I'm going to use this anti-rust gel to dissolve the rust. I need to wash it off. And back to the wire wheel to shine up the parts. I'll use a Scotch-Brite pad to shine up this copper ribbon that it uses as a tuning belt. I need to attack the outside edge of the wheel with sandpaper, just like I did with the rest of the metal parts. The tuning scale is actually in pretty good shape. It's just a little bit dirty. So here's the tricky part. We got to get this tuning tape wound back around, I guess for want of a better term, the tuning spool, which means I need to twist it around the right number of turns, but still have it be loose enough so that I can get this clip in underneath it and tighten it up, which means it's actually not quite tight enough yet. I'm going to have to pull the wheel off and send it back around one more time. And now we need to do the same thing with the tape on the other side. Get the right number of turns around for that. And then I'm going to have to pull it off of there so that I can screw the clip down. And then I can tighten the first screw perfectly and get all those coils on there. If I put the wheel back on, it should be right. There we go. Now we'll put the wheel back on with this big nut. Once we got the nut tightened down to our satisfaction, we have this metal plate with little ears on it underneath that we can bed up the ears to keep the nut from slipping. And then the fun part, getting this darn spring on. Every time I do one of these things, it slips off the pliers several times, like this. But eventually we will get it on the tab. There we go. All right. So when you turn this wheel, you can see that it moves the plates in the condenser, which changes their capacitance. Now I'm going to put some 3-in-1 oil on all the moving parts here. You'll notice I'm not wearing gloves. This is a bad idea. Please see my recent video on workshop safety. And once I've got some oil on all the moving parts, we can reinstall the tuning scale. There's a tab on the tape and a tab on the scale, and this little push rod is used to make the tape move the scale. I'm going to set this up to approximately where it was when I got the radio, but we will put this in exactly the right spot after we have the whole thing up and running. And that completes the tuning system. So when we do the next video of this series, we'll address another part of the Brunswick radio. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like it. If you're enjoying our videos in general, please let YouTube know and us know by subscribing to the channel, and leave comments on any of the videos that you like, and we'll try to reply if we can. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time on the Moot Workshop.